We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Beis in Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 103b. On the previous Amud, the Mishnah said, if an individual says, Harei alai mincha min hasaorim, it's upon me to bring a mincha from barley, so there is no donated mincha from barley, and therefore he has to bring a mincha min hachitim, he has to bring a mincha from wheat. And on the previous Amud, there were two opinions in understanding the Mishnah. According to Chizkiah, this is Chizkiah's initial understanding. The Mishnah is following Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai hold Tefos, Lashon Rishon. We follow the first part of the statement. And so the first part of the statement was, Harei alai mincha, I'm going to bring a mincha. That means a minchas chitim. Then later, when he says Sa'orim, he's not able to undo his original neder. Therefore, he has to bring that mincha from chitin. That was Chizkiah's first explanation. And then we had Chizkiah's second explanation, which was also Rabbi Yochanan's explanation, that it's not due to Tefos, Lashon Rishon. Rather, the idea is when a person says, Harei alai mincha, and then he says minha sa'orim, so he actually thinks that sa'orim is a proper carbon mincha. And really he tells us that had he known that sa'orim was not a proper carbon mincha, he would have brought the mincha from chitin. And therefore, essentially, we assume that he simply made a mistake and he did want to bring a proper mincha, and that's why he has to bring the mincha min hachitin. And the Gemara now continues, and as Rashi is going to understand it, the Gemara's continuation over here is actually according to Chizkiah's first understanding. Amar Ze'iri says, Lo shanu. We did not learn this case in the Mishnah. Ela de amar mincha. He has to have said Harei alai mincha. Avalo amar mincha. But if he doesn't say Harei alai mincha, so then lo. Then the teaching of the Mishnah would not be true. Rashi explains, Lo shanu de tefos lashon rishon. We only learn in the Mishnah, again, this is following the Chizki's interpretation that the Mishnah follows Beis Shammai. We only say in the Mishnah that tefos lashon rishon, and he brings a mincha from chitin, elo do amar mincha min hasaorim. That's only where he says, Harei alai mincha min hasaorim. The ikol amemer, because then it's possible to say, Kevon do amar mincha, since he said the word mincha, he said Harei alai mincha, so therefore le mincha gemura kamechavin, he is intending a regular mincha. Avol Amar, but let's say he would say as follows, minchas sa'orim. He wouldn't say harei alai mincha, but he would say minchas sa'orim. Clearly the word minchas there connects to sa'orim. So mincha as sa'orim koi, the word mincha is going on sa'orim. Upater, and in that case he would be exempt. There is no minchas sa'orim that's donated. Delekol amemar tfos lashon rishon, because there the possibility of tfos lashon rishon is not a possibility, and so therefore it has to be specifically again where he says mincha. And Rashi continues, Lishna Achrin, another understanding of a lo amar mincha lo. If he doesn't say mincha, then no, meaning ella harei alai sa'orim. Let's say he doesn't say the word mincha at all. He doesn't say mincha sa'orim. He says harei alai sa'orim. So again, over there, Pater, he's exempt. Devadai l'sa'orim echavin. There he certainly was intending for sa'orim, and so therefore, again, in that situation, he is going to be exempt. And the Gemara continues, Yosef Rav Nachman v'kamar lo l'hashmaiter. Rav Nachman was sitting, and he was saying over this teaching, Eisvei Rav Rav Nachman. Rav asked Rav Nachman a question based on the Mishnah itself. The Mishnah then had a case of kemach yavi solas. Let's say he says, I'm going to bring kemach, which is flour. He should bring from fine flour. And so lav de lo amar mincha. Isn't the Mishnah talking about a case when he didn't say the word mincha over here? It just says kemach. He just said harei alai kemach. And so therefore you see, not like zeiri. And the Gemara says, lo, no, that's not what the Mishnah means at all. De amar mincha. He said the word mincha. He said harei alai mincha. And he said he's going to bring it from kemach. Rashi explains, my lav de lo amar mincha elo harei alai kemach. Initially the Gemara thinks he just says harei alai kemach. Afilu hachi chayev. Still the Mishnah is saying chayev for a different reason. Dein adam motzi dvar v'levatol. A person wouldn't say something that doesn't mean anything. That's what the Gemara thinks, and the Gemara says no. The case actually is that he does say the word mincha, and therefore if he says the word mincha, again that would follow the idea of tefos lashon rishon. And the Gemara continues, the Mishnah then said, below shemen ulavona. If he says he's going to bring a mincha without shemen and lavona, yavi shemen ulavona. He has to bring it with shemen and lavona, with the oil and the frankincense. And again, the Gemara says, my lav, is it not? De lo amar mincha, that he didn't say the word mincha. Again, that goes against the iri. And again, the Gemara says, lo, no, de amar mincha, that he did say the word mincha. And the Gemara continues, then the Mishnah said, chatzi isaron. If he says, I'm going to bring a half isaron, yavi isaron shalom. A half isaron is not the amount you bring for a mincha. He has to bring a full isaron. Again, the Gemara says, my lav, is it not? The lo amar mincha, he doesn't say the word mincha. And the Gemara says, lo, no, the amar mincha, that he does say the word mincha. But the Gemara now continues and asks, Ihachi, if so, Amos Seifa, let's look at the end of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah had a case, Isaron umechzav. He says an Isaron and a half, so Yavi Shnayim. Then he has to bring 2 Isaron. Now, Kevan Damar Mincha, if you're explaining everything over here that he says the word Mincha, so once he says the word Mincha, Ichayiv le Bisaron, he actually is obligated to bring an Isaron. And Kiyamar Chatzi Isaron, when he says then half Isaron, Lo Klum Kamar, he's not saying anything. And Rashi explains, Ki Yamar Chatzi Yisarn, when he says Chatzi Yisarn, Lomar Klum, he's not saying anything. V'laisi Chad Yisarn V'sulo, and if that's the case, really he should bring one Yisarn and no more than that. In other words, the Gemara's understanding that if he says Harei Olai Mincha and Tefos Lashon Rishon, if the explanation is we're just taking the first part of his statement, so the first part of his statement is going on Yisarn, and we should just ignore the Chatzi Yisarn. Why are we saying that he brings two Yisarn? And the Gemara continues and says, Lo no tzricha, it's necessary. The Yamar, he says as follows, Harei Olai Mincha Chatzi Isaron v'Isaron. He actually says the word Chatzi Isaron. He says those words before the word Isaron. So he says it's upon me to bring a mincha, a half Isaron and an Isaron. To Kavan Damar Mincha, therefore, since he said mincha ichayev le b'Isaron, that makes him chayev to bring an Isaron. A mincha is an Isaron. And Kiyamar Chatzi Isaron v'lo klum kamer. When he says Chatzi Isaron, that actually is correct. It's nothing, and therefore we ignore that. But Kihadar Amar Isaron. But then when he says Isaron again, so Maisi Isaron Achrini, he has to bring another Isaron. In other words, it's not that he's saying Isaron twice, but the word mincha means an isaron, and the word isaron at the end means an isaron, and that's why he has to bring two isaron. But the Gemara then continues and asks, if so, Rabbi Shimon poter. It said at the end of the Mishnah that Rabbi Shimon says exempt, shalo hisnadev kederach hamisnadvin, because he hasn't donated in the regular fashion. So am I, but why should that be true? Rashi explains the question. If so, Rabbi Shimon poter kevon de tefos lashon rishon. If we're explaining that tefos lashon rishon, we take the first part of the statement, and now v'iyu amar mincha, and in all of these cases the word mincha was said at the beginning. So harei nadev kederach hamisnadvim. So he has made a regular normal donation. He said harei olai mincha. So what's even the question over here? Why does Rabbi Shimon say exempt? And the Gemara continues and answers. Amar Rava, Rava says, Rabbi Shimon b'shitas Rabbi Yossi Amar. Rabbi Shimon is following the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. He doesn't hold tefos lashon rishon. The Amar af b'gemar devarav adam matvis, because Rabbi Yossi says we even take into account the end of the phrase. And Rashi explains hachi garsinan af b'gemar devarav adam nitzvas means the lo azlinan basar lashon rishon lechudei. According to Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Yossi, we don't only follow the first part of the phrase v'lo basar achron and not the latter part v'lo basar achron lechudei. Elo basar kulu. Rather, we follow the entire phrase. We have to take it all into account. And therefore, v'zesh amar mincha chatzi isaron v'isaron. Therefore, for example, if he says a mincha, a half isaron, and an isaron, so we assume peirushay kamefarish. He's explaining mincha shel chatzi isaron v'isaron. He's explaining and he's bringing a mincha of an isaron and a half. V'hainu shelo kederach hamisnadvim, and that's already not a normal way to donate. And that's why, again, we say exempt according to Rabbi Shimon, or v'shitas Rabbi Yossi Amron. Again, he's following the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Misnadev adam mincha shel shishim isaron. A person can donate a mincha of 60 isaron. Umevi b'kli echad, he can bring all of that. That entire mincha can be brought in one vessel. Imamar harei olai samech aleph. Now, if he says it's upon me to bring 61 isaron as a mincha, so maybe shishim b'kli echad, he brings 60 in one vessel. The echad b'kli echad, and then the other isaron he brings in another vessel. And why is that the case? Shakein hatzibur mevi b'yom tov harishon shel chag, because the community on the first day of Yom Tov of Sukkot, what do they bring? If Shecholios b'Shabbos, if that day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, they bring Shishim v'Yachad. If you count out how many Isaron they bring, it's 61 Isaron. And so therefore we say, Dayo liyochid shu pachas min hatzibur echad. If there's an individual, it's sufficient that he's less than the community by one. If they bring a maximum of 61, then he should never bring over 60. That's why the 60 is the maximum in one vessel. But the Mishnah continues, Amar Rabbi Shimon says, V'alo elu laparim, ve'elu lekvasim, but when it comes to the community bring on sukkahs, you have some for bulls, and some are accompanying lambs. Ve'enam nivlolim ze'im ze. You can't mix those together. It's not like they're all brought in one vessel. They have different consistencies in terms of the ratio of the amount of oil. Ella, rather, ad shishim yechon livol. It's a different reason altogether. Until 60, it's possible to mix with oil. That's a possibility, and therefore it's a maximum of 60 in one vessel. Amrulo, so they said to him, Shishim nivlolin v'shishim v'yachad ein nivlolin. Is it that 60 can be mixed and 61 can't be mixed? We really make such a distinction. Amar lahem, he said to them, Kol midos chachamim kain. That's true by all measures of the chachamim. But arboim sahu tovel, a person can immerse, for example, in 40 sa. Uve arboim sa chaser korta, but if it's 40 sa missing a little, eino yachol litval behen, one cannot immerse. There has to be essentially a cutoff. That's how we determine in general our shiurim. And Rashi explains, Hachi Garsinan Shakain Matzino Shahat Tzibor Mevi. This is what we find that the Tzibor brings, and Rashi does the calculation on Sukkos, Liyud Gimel Parim, Lamed Tes Esronim, Shlosha Esronim Lapar, Uliyud Dalet Kvasim, Yudalet Esronim, for the 13 bulls, so it's going to be 39 Esronim, because each one is going to be 3, and then for the 14 lambs, it's going to be 14 Isaron, Harei Nun Gimel, that brings us to 53, Vilishnei Elam Dalet Esronim, to the 2 rams, it's 4 Esronim, Harei Nun Zayin, that brings us to 57, Vilishnei Tamidin Shnayim, and then the 2 Tamids get to, Vilishnei Kivsei Musaf to Shabbos Shnayim, and then for the lambs of the Musaf of Shabbos to Harei Samech Aleph, that's a total of 61. Amar Le Rabbi Shimon said to him, V'chiosan Samech Aleph Esronim, Bikli Echad, how you are those 61 Esronim, you think those are in one vessel? And Rashi continues, V'alo Elu Leparim, Ve'elu Lekvasim, but these are for Parim, these are for Kvasim, V'ma'ariv Lu, and if he's going to mix them together, Mifsali, it's going to be disqualified. Sheminchas Parim Bli Losa Ava, because when it comes to Minchas Parim, there the mixture is thick. Shnei Lugin Li Isaron, that's 2 lug for an Isaron. Chatzi Hin Legimel Esronim, that's a half a hin for 3 Esronim. Uminchas Kvasim Bli Losa Raka, when it comes to lambs, the mixing of the oil is thin. Revias Hahin Li Isaron, that's a quarter of a hin for an Isaron. Dahainu Shlosh Lugin, which is 3 lug. Vehin Bolo Zumizu, and now they're gonna absorb from one another. Venimsas Zu Chasera V'Zu Yaser, it's going to come out that this one is missing and this one has extra. Ella rather, Mivnei Ma'ain Mevi Yochid Shishim V'Echad Isaron B'Kli Echad, says Rabbi Shimon, what's the real reason why an individual doesn't bring 61 Isaron in one vessel? The Ad Shishim Yechon Livola B'Kli Echad B'Lug Echad, because until 60 Isaron, one is able to mix in one vessel with 1 lug. Rashi understands we're following the opinion over here that you're always using just 1 lug of oil, even if it's a large mincha. Ve'alibad Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Nakad La, Rashi says this is following Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Beperek Shtei Midos, that was earlier in Perek Shtei Midos, Afilu mincha shel shishim Isaron, that even if you have a mincha of 60 Isaron, Ein lo ela lug, it only gets 1 lug of oil. And the Gemara now quotes a Braisa, Shoel she'elo l'mala me Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi. They asked a question before Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi. Minayin lo'omer harei olai shishim v'yechad. From where do we know that if somebody says it's upon me to bring 61, that maybe shishim b'chli echad v'yechad b'chli echad, that he brings 60 Isaron in one vessel and 1 Isaron in one vessel. Pasach Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, Rosh HaMedabrim b'chol makom. So Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, who was the first of speakers everywhere, v'yamar, he opened and he said as follows: Shekein matzino tzibur b'yom tov harishon shel chag shecholios b'Shabbos. We find that the community, they bring, if the first day of Yom Tov of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, they bring shishim v'yechad, they bring 61 Isaron, and so dayo liyochid sheyifchos min hatzibur echad, it's sufficient for the individual that he should have less than the community by 1. Amar lo Rabbi Shimon, so Rabbi Shimon said to him, he said to Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, v'halo elu parim ve'elim ve'elu kvasim, but these are bulls and rams and these are lambs. Elu bli losan ava, these have a thick mixture. V'elu bli losan rak, and these have a thin mixture. Elu bli losan shachars, these are mixed in the morning. Ve'elu bli losan bein arbayim, and these are mixed in the evening. Ve'ein nivlalin mizalza, they're not mixed one to the other. And so therefore, what kind of reasoning is this? So Amru lo, so he said back to him, Emor ata, so you say what the reason is. Amar lohem, he said to them, Harehu omer, behold, it says in the pasuk, V'chol mincha belula b'shemen v'chareva, it says you have a mincha that's mixed with oil and dry, and so kvar amra Torah have mincha sheyechola lehivolel. What the Torah is saying is you have to bring a mincha that's able to be mixed. So Amar le, so he said to him, B'shishim nivlalin, b'shishim v'yechad, ein nivlalin, it's able to be mixed in 60, and suddenly in 61 it can't be mixed. Amar lo, he said to him, Kol midas chachamim keinu, that's true of all measures of the chachamim. Ba'arboim saw hu tovel, and 40 saw one immerses. Ba'arboim saw chaser kurtav, eino yachol litval. If it's 40 saw but missing a little from 40, if it's less than 40, even by a small amount, one cannot immerse. Kibeitza metame tomas ochlin, if the food is a kibeitza, so then it conveys tomas ochlin. Kibeitza chaser shumsham, but if it's the size of an egg, but it's missing a sesame, it's a tiny bit less than the size of an egg, ein metame tomas ochlin, then it does not convey that tomas ochlin. Shlosha al shlosha metame medras, and shlosha al shlosha, that's if you have a garment that's 3 by 3 tvachim, so then it's metame medras, then it's able to contract tumah when rested upon. But shlosha al shlosha chaser nima achas, but if it's, let's say, a cloth that's 3 by 3 but missing a little, it's a a little less than 3 by 3 tvachim, so then eino metame medrus, then it is not going to contract that medrus tumah. But the Gemara continues and asks, v'chi ein nivlolin my have it, but if it doesn't mix, what difference does it make? Why is the ability to mix with oil, why is that crucial? But we learned in a Mishnah, im lo bol al kosher, even if it wasn't mixed, it is still kosher. The Gemara says to that, Amar Rabbi Zera says, kol haroi lebila ein bila makeves bo, as long as it's fit to be mixed, so the mixing is not critical. Even if it's not actually mixed with oil, as long as it's able to be mixed, that's what's critical. V'chol she'eino roi lebila, but if it's not fit to be mixed, if that's not even a possibility, so bila makeves bo, so that mixing is going to be required. In other words, the fact that it's not potentially possible, that is going to be problematic. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Bivi, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Bivi says, that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Maisa bepir da'achas shel beis Rebbe, there was an incident with a mule of the house of Rebbe, shemesa that it died, v'shiru chacham mesdama, and the chachamim, they measured the amount of blood, beravias, to measure that it was in fact a revius, because if it's a revius, then it's going to conduct the tumas nevela. Rashi explains, V'shiro chacham esdama sheyatza mimena, they measured the amount of blood that came out of it. And Rashi continues, B'revius, for a quarter lug of blood, leida im yesh bo revius, they had to know, does it have a revius of blood? Then yifrashu mimenu kinevela, they have to separate from it, like they separate from the vela, because of tumah. Va'aidi da'ayri la'el b'shiurim, so since before we were discussing measures, kol midas chachamim kachim, that this is all the measures of the chachamim, so nakad nami lahai shiura d'rabbanani, so therefore we're also discussing this shir d'rabbanan. Revius dam yochol likrosh v'lamar al kazayis, and the reason why a revius is because when you have a revius of blood, that's able to congeal and become a kazayis, and that actually is the shear for Tumas Nevela. And the Gemara continues, Mesiv Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna asked the following question from a Braisa, Hayed Rabbi Yoshua of Rabbi Yoshua ben Beseir, Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Yoshua ben Beseir, they testified, Al dam nevelos shutar, that the blood from nevelos, that is tahar. V'yam Rabbi Yoshua ben Beseir, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Beseir said, Maisav hayu nochrin arudios la'arayos be'estarya shel melech. It once happened that they were spearing wild donkeys to feed to the lions of the military of the king. And those who were visiting for the regalim, they were wading in the blood up to their knees. And the Chachamim didn't say anything to them. Apparently, again, there is no issue of tumah by the blood of nevela. And so the Gemara says, Ishtik, he was silent, he had no answer for this, because it does seem clear from the Braisa that there is no tumas nevela by the blood. And so the Gemara continues, Amar le Rabbi Zreika said to him, he said to Rabbi Vi, my time aloka mahader mar, why didn't the master respond? Amar le said to him, Hechi ahader le, how could I respond to him? The Amar Rabbi Chanin, because Rabbi Chanin says, V'hayu chayecha teluim l'chami neged, when it says in the pasuk that your life will hang in the balance, Zeh lokeach tevua mishana l'shana, this is a person who has to buy grain from 1 year to the next. He doesn't even have his own land. Ufacharata laila v'yomim, when it says you're going to be afraid day and night, Zeh lokeach tevua me'erev Shabbos l'erev Shabbos, this is a person in an even worse predicament. He buys the grain every single week. V'altamin b'chayecha, when it says you won't trust in your life, Zeh somech ala palter, that refers to somebody who relies on the baker. And Rashi explains, halokeach tevua mishana l'shana she'ein lo karka l'zroa, he doesn't have any land to plant on. V'hainu chayev teluyim, that's why his life hangs in the balance. She'eino yodeim yu lo mos l'shana haba, he doesn't know if he will have money next year. And hapalter is nachdom, the palter is the baker, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Dalid Amud Aleph.